Hello, Internet. My name is Bret, and this is my show. I'm here every week on Thursday talking about everything containers and DevOps. That includes Kubernetes and Docker and Swarm. And this week, we're going to talk about serverless and functions as a service, as well as a whole bunch of other stuff that Alex is working on. But first up, just want you to know, if in case you're first timer here on the live show, or if you're watching this after the broadcast, you can sign up for this channel here, and there's a bunch of links in the description on how you can get the newsletter that's related and how you can get on the podcast. You can listen to this podcast because we take this show, turn it into an audio-only podcast, and release that sometime in the near future. So this show is not just an interview and hanging out with friends, but also you're asking questions live, and that's the benefit of being here in the real time, is you get to ask questions, and hopefully Alex or I will have answers for you. So let me just invite real quick to the show Alex Ellis. He is the founder of OpenFaaS. We've known each other for years now, and he's also a CNCF ambassador. Thanks for being on the show, Alex.
Thanks, Bret. It's great to be on your show finally.
Yeah, we've been talking about this for a while. We actually saw each other in Berlin like 3 or 4 months ago.
Yep, for GoTo. Yeah, that was a really good event. Yeah, it was good to see you there.
Yeah, it was a good time. And that was a pretty cool conference. It was only my second time in Berlin, so it's always great to see that city. What did you talk about there?
I went there to talk about Plonk, which is how we're talking about OpenFaaS at the moment.
Yeah.
I guess one of the reasons for that is because sometimes people, when they start looking at Kubernetes and containers, and they hear the word serverless, they get a bit confused and say things like, we're not ready for serverless yet, as if they kind of have figured out what serverless is and it doesn't apply. However, when you look at a project like OpenFaaS, it started out as a way of getting functions running basically on your own hardware in containers. And so what we're doing with Plonk is trying to kind of reframe OpenFaaS and the cloud native tools that make up that stack as a stack for application developers, where really we've done a lot of work around the developer experience and making sure it's sort of batteries included.
Yeah, which is important. That's a big deal in this show too, because I think a lot of these tools can be fairly complex to, even understand and implement. So, but before we get into the fun stuff, let me just give you all a little brief recap of who Alex is and why he's here. So he's a respected expert on serverless and cloud native computing. He's been speaking all over the world, helping organizations with serverless for years now. He founded OpenFaaS, one of the most popular open source serverless projects, where he has built a community via writing. He's blogging all the time. He's speaking at conferences and extensive personal engagement with people. The community runs his own Slack for all of this stuff. He's also a consultant and CNCF ambassador. That's the same organization that maintains a lot of these tools like Kubernetes and whatnot. He helps companies around the world building great developer experiences and navigate the cloud native landscape. So this show is really going to be all about how containers and the world of DevOps relate to this new idea of serverless or functions as a service. So I guess first up, my biggest question I always have a hard time explaining is, Alex, is there a difference between serverless and FaaS? Are those terms interchangeable? What's going on there?
Yeah, I guess that's something that comes up a lot, or at least came up a lot when this idea first came about. And the way I kind of look at it is serverless is like a category of computing, like maybe like cloud, and functions is a more specific part of that. If you think about it, you might have cloud computing, but then within that, you've got things like SAN, like network access for storage, and you have things like perhaps compute and other areas. Functions are really just another part of compute. And when you look at it from a serverless perspective, it's really saying, okay, well, we understand compute very well, but now let's take it and abstract it a little bit. Let's put some checks and balances in there so that when we look at this compute, it's actually got a kind of interface around it and some characteristics. The main characteristic is the developer experience. So the purest form of let's say a function would be something that takes an input, and then given that input runs a bit of code and produces an output. So I remember you were there when I had the privilege to go and speak at DockerCon in 2017 and sort of launched this project as FaaS. And I showed the Alexa, and I spoke to it, and I sort of asked her what the weather was, and that was one of the built-in skills. But then we were doing this Moby Mingles, where people could kind of arrange these little chats with each other, and I was able to ask it how many Moby Mingles there were, and that went off and ran an API call to their third-party service from the company that was running it, got the value back, put it in a nice sentence, and then we were able to sort of customize that IoT device.
Yeah, that was an exciting time, 2017. That was you in front of like 6,000 people, wasn't it?
It was, it was definitely like a harrowing experience. First time of doing something like that. Yeah.
Yeah, that's like one of those moments in life where you can probably look at a room full of people and go, none of you have done that. None of you had to pull off a demo working on the internet with a lot of interchangeable parts in front of a massive audience, and it all worked. So,
I mean, I had about 6 live demos, I think, and you can go and find it up on the internet, because I think recordings are just for wimps.
yeah, and that's the theme of DockerCon. It's always been about live demos, right? Nothing recorded. Like, obviously, if you have a fail, you have a sort of a backup plan, but it's always about how many live demos can we put on the main stage in one show. You know?
I guess when it goes wrong, it really goes wrong, but we shouldn't be too hard on our friend Gareth.
We got to bring him up. Yeah, there have been fails over the years, right? And it's always, you're always in the audience going, "Oh, I feel so sorry for you right now," because none of us want to be that person. We all want to be on stage, but none of us want to be that person.
It's good if you have a few lined up. And so that was kind of where I started to look at it. And then one of the other demos was we were transferring some files from the West Coast to the East Coast, but needing an audit trail of how many files had actually been recorded in the database. It was using Minio, an S3 alternative. And every time Minio received a file and verified it, it sent a webhook, and the function recorded that. We were able to kind of inspect that with Grafana and compare it to what we're expecting. But that was, 3 years ago. And now what we've seen is that there's like 50 or so, maybe a few more companies that have gone and put their logo on the OpenFaaS homepage to say they're using it in production. Companies like Vision Banco that I spoke with from Paraguay last year. And Proticio had basically ported over a lot of their home banking service running on Node.js to previously running in Java over to Node.js and running it with OpenFaaS. I couldn't believe it, actually, when he told me he worked at a bank and he was running OpenFaaS in production on that scale. So that is really like the other end of functions, is they're just microservices, but this serverless approach means that they'll auto scale, that we get metrics built in, that there's a nice build system there, and a good way of kind of managing that.
Yeah, that is really cool. Tons and tons. And the community, I think it's one of the most amazing parts of this story, is that you started this at DockerCon, and you've had, it says here on your website, over 200 contributors. Tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, I think there's like 250 now, and we just show you like a random selection of them on this page, which is really, really cool. But yeah, I started the project. Docker were like, it's not good enough yet, keep pushing. And that kind of really spurred me on to try to go just a little bit further. And I thought I'd create something so cool that 6,000 people had seen it, that now I'd just have people lining up to contribute to it and use it at work. And it really wasn't the case. But I did have a small community of people that had been kind of helping and that were interesting, mainly from like my blog posts and tutorials. And so I started to try and find ways of getting them to help, whether it was updating a README or raising an issue or making a change here and there. And probably the best thing that could have happened for the project was adding a CLI, because it just didn't have one. And then people drew in, and the early people that worked on that tended to kind of stick around. They're still there. A lot of them are still there now, because CLI is something that's quite approachable, right? You calling an API, printing some results out, and that's one of the areas where we've had the most contributions.
Interesting. Yeah, and so that allows you to be able to add new functions, manage functions without having to use Docker or Kubernetes commands. Is that the idea there?
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, to begin with, I think I was using there was a little bit of a UI. It wasn't very good, and then you could put them in your Docker Compose stack files. Now there's a whole RESTful API on Kubernetes. There's what's called a custom resource definition, and Kubernetes nerds go crazy for those. It's like catnip. And so everything is there that you'd expect, all in the right places. And then the CLI can allow you to like log in, list functions from a function store. That's something that was added in collaboration with a guy called Ken Fukuyama over in Japan. And I had all of the API ready for that and the idea for the CLI, but I needed the UI. And so he worked on that and got it finished just in time for my first KubeCon in Austin, and I was able to show it there, and people really responded well to that idea of sharing and discovering what other people had built and reusing that.
Very cool. Well, while we're on the topic of OpenFaaS, I've got let's see, I've got a first question here. When you say that a function would be running in a container, how is it different than, say, Nginx service running in a container? How do you just run a function?
Yeah, I mean, effectively, they are the same. So what you have is something like Nginx. If it conforms to a basic runtime contract, then we can deploy even Nginx in OpenFaaS, and you can get all of the benefits of scaling to zero, horizontal scaling across the infrastructure that you've got, metrics, the UI, the RESTful API. And so then you get something that, it kind of feels like containers as a service, but there's just enough of the functional benefits there that if you just wanted to do pure functions, event-driven programming, and all the rest of it, you could do that too. So if you look in the OpenFaaS docs, there's actually there's like a runtime definition, and at the moment that is it should serve HTTP traffic on port 8080 and have a health check, and that's about it. And if you can conform to that, we can deploy and manage that for you in a container.
Cool.
Yeah.
Do you have a demo on OpenFaaS you want to walk through?
Yeah. So what I wanted to show you is that sometimes when people get started, it can be a little bit to take in, right? So you've got to understand functions, containers, Kubernetes, serverless, and maybe just a bit too much. So what I've gone and done is put together this thing called OpenFaaS Cloud. And here we can commit code into a GitHub repository, and that code will then go through a complete container pipeline, and out the end of it, there'll be a container image, and it will get deployed off the other side. So I think I'm sharing now.
Let's see. Yeah.
And this is a kind of dashboard that you'll get. So it actually has OAuth on it. So it's authenticated and federated. And I can see the functions for myself, but also other organizations that I'm a member of. One of the functions that I like is this join welcome. And we see it's being fired off quite a lot now. As people join a Slack channel, it fires a 200 if it's a channel that we care about. And if it's a channel we don't care about, like, I don't know, the Raspberry Pi channel, we don't specifically send emojis into it, then it returns an error. And so we can see out of the last 24 hours, there's been 129 times where it's fired off when it should have done. I can actually probably just show you that. This will be the OpenFaaS Slack. And in the main channel, OpenFaaS, we actually see, wow, okay, these people, when they joined, that a webhook was fired by Slack. It went over to the function I was showing you, executed, and then called back in to Slack with a secret, and it welcomed that person by name. And Jeff Lowry's been putting spinning stars on that. So from this dashboard, I can see those invocations. I can see the URL for the endpoint, the Docker image that was produced, and I can link through to the code. So I wanted to show you that, but a bit of a simpler example. So if I go to my own dashboard, Alex Ellis, I can actually get a function to appear on there. How we'll do that is by having a GitHub repository. So we've got Bret YouTube Live, and I'm using Visual Studio Code, And the CLI we were talking about has a template store. And when we look in the template store, we can find different programming languages that we can use here to print something out, right? Or to process a webhook or to run a website for us. What I'm going to do is FaaS CLI new, and we'll use Node 12, which is the current LTS JavaScript version. We'll just call it, I don't know, YTL. What that does is it creates this YTL YAML file, and we see, just like you'd have in a Docker Compose, it's a similar sort of thing. What's the image that's going to be produced? What's the template? What folder is it in? If we want environmental variables, we can supply them there as well. And in this example, this isn't a microservice, not like the Nginx use case. This is just for a function, but both are fine. And we see this received input. And so we could put, I don't know, received, because we're on YouTube. I don't know if there's a TV.
Yeah, there is a TV one. Yeah,
right. We received a TV. And now, because I want to put this on the community cluster, what I need to do is do my git commit that I would normally do, initial, and I just have to link together the function repo with OpenFaaS Cloud on the community cluster. So I've agreed to the terms and conditions, and I've done all of this, and now there's an app that gives permission to the cluster to only administrate that repo in the ways that is needed, basically. Read access to the code, metadata, and checks. That's it, nothing more. And then we put in YouTube Live, save this. Now we've got access in the app to that repo. So there's none of this go off and create manual webhooks. It won't show up yet because we've not done anything. But now we can push the code. And open the repo. And because we've got that commit that's gone in, we can see it's popped up here. And the first thing you see is that it discovers it, and it says, right, this is for me. And then it will discover what functions are there. It will start to build those functions, and then the logs for the functions will be outputted. Now, there's actually a template called Dockerfile. So in your Nginx use case, you could literally just have a Docker file in there that says from Nginx, add my config, and you'd get something out the other end as well. This is actually on the Docker Hub, and it took 3.8 seconds to push it up there. You guys are welcome to go and look at that if you want. And there's the endpoint for it. And over on the dashboard, we do refresh. We'll see that it's appeared there, YTL. I can click on it. I see the there's no invocations yet. Oh, there we go. Received input. And so that's our function. What we can also do then is go and edit it. We could connect this to a webhook. There's something that I was going to show. Because the repo, and so maybe you could get a bit interactive, the repo has an open issue, and people can actually comment on this. I don't know if you can grab that at all. GitHub.com, Alex, Ellis, Bret, YTL.
Yeah.
And what I'll do is I'll set a webhook up from here for any new issues that are created. And I'm just going to put in the URL of our function, and I would go application JSON. We can put a secret in here if we want. And let's see, what can we get? We want commented events, issue comments. Hit add webhook. Okay, and that's now live. And if we go and do a comment, if anyone's been in there yet. There we are. We'll see on our counter over here, that's going to go from 1 to 4 and so on. And we actually have invocation logs in here, and we can see all of the HTTP calls that have come in, and we can basically watch that. And now because we're getting that webhook sent in from GitHub, we could actually go process it. Let's see if we've got any more yet. Nothing yet. And on this page, you can also play back the deliveries, which I really like. It's a very neat feature. So I can then click on this delivery. If I've got a problem, I'm debugging. Okay, so this is action equals created. If we wanted to, we could go over to our code again and say if event.body.action equals created. And we could, I don't know, do whatever we were going to do. And this is where I think serverless can be quite interesting from like a glue perspective. So we go like Amazon's simple email service .send email, and then we could put some sort of environmental variable there, email template. And then if we save this and deployed it again, every time somebody commented on there, we could effectively look them up and send them an email. And it's just a quick example of what you can build in a matter of seconds.
That's really great. You got some more comments in there, including Sujay, Docker Captain, saying, "Hi, Alex." He hangs out in the show every once in a while. It's always great when friends show up. Ray's on the show too, down there in the islands. What's up, Ray? So this, I'm trying to think what's next. Like, if this is that easy to experiment with, what are the arguments that people are having against even trying this out? Like, what's other than just learning the tools? Because you were talking earlier about that people say, well, we're not ready for serverless.
I think when people understand that Kubernetes is very difficult to master, and it is even very difficult to get to the point where as a team you can feel confident that the processes that you've taken would result in a secure application in production that's potentially cost effective and has a number of other benefits to it. It's very, very difficult, very hard to get to that point. And you probably could benefit from using an external consultant or training company, somebody sort of give it an external review. Well, with something like OpenFaaS, you can probably run most of those compute workloads, but it gets reduced down to this stack YAML file and maybe a Docker file. So if you're not quite ready for functions and that sort of approach, you can have a Docker file. If you can Dockerize it, then it's fair game. Just listen on the correct HTTP port and you've got 4 lines of YAML. If you compare that to Kubernetes, and we have done, as I showed at Go2 actually had a nice animation of all of these files popping up. It was like 500 lines of text because you need a deployment, you need a service, you need an ingress, you need your Docker file, you need your entry point. There's more to it than that. There's even more. You might
get your config maps and your
policy.
secrets.
You're going to have a definition for the certificate. It just goes on and on and on. Well, if somebody in your team is kind of like a Bret Fisher, they can kind of swoop in and deploy OpenFaaS Cloud on AWS, and then all people have to do is what I just showed you now, and they'll have effectively production-ready scalable endpoint with TLS. And
how do you see when people start to experiment with something like OpenFaaS and serverless? I talk about that people assume that it's just going to take over everything, and I tend to talk about that. Well, it's not likely that people are just going to take all their old code that they wrote before this and suddenly convert it. So I don't really have any clients using serverless yet. My assumption is that they're augmenting existing applications and infrastructure with serverless rather than trying to rewrite code. Is that true?
Yeah, I mean, I have a client at the moment called DX, and they're a ticket sales company and also have venue management software that's really popular in the country. And they have a big monolith that's written in PHP and can run in a Docker container. And I think using PHP FPM, they are going to lift and shift that to OpenFaaS Cloud completely. But they still want to do the build for that on their old Travis system. But then they'll just use OpenFaaS Cloud to control the version, to control the scaling, the metrics, and get some insights on it. So they are actually doing a complete lift and shift, and they don't have to change the code at all. They then have a few brownfield services written in Laravel, some written in C#. They're coming across, again, with a Docker file. But then everything that's new they want to write in C# 3.1 with .NET Core, and also using Go. And so for those, they can just use the templates that we've already got, and they can start sort of expanding. But the important thing for them is that not everybody in their team has to be has to have a PhD in YAML, right, and to keep up. An example was that in Kubernetes 1.16, the apps 1 beta moved to apps v1 and stopped working. With OpenFaaS, you didn't have to do anything. You just update the version of OpenFaaS and then you're good. It's exactly the same workflow. But for us running OpenFaaS, we had to go running around through all the files because it's a normal Kubernetes application, updating everything and retesting it.
Yeah. And this runs everywhere, right? So like, tell me all the ways that you can deploy OpenFaaS. Like, I know there's more than a few.
Yeah. I mean, I shared my screen earlier, so do it again. If we get me over on the switchboard, I did tweet about this. Over in my other screen, I have kubectl get node. I don't know if you can zoom out on the camera, but behind me,
yeah, I don't
have a whole bunch.
I don't have that feature.
And if anybody can see that, if I get out of the way, but there's a whole bunch of flashing lights. So there's 2 switches and 24 Raspberry Pis, all running in a chassis from. Oh yeah, there we go.
Yeah,
all running in this chassis, and they're just the normal Raspberry Pi 3s. And what I've done is I've used a tool called Ketchup or K3S Up to install a smaller version of Kubernetes than we're used to working with. And this has come out of Rancher, and it was actually featured on your show not too long ago with Darren.
Yeah, it was like October. Yeah, we had a interview with Rancher co-founder and talked about a lot of their cool tools. So K3SUP.
Yeah, and so we've got on this cluster, we've got all the normal stuff. And then as well as the Kubernetes control plane, there's the OpenFaaS functions that I've deployed and the OpenFaaS control plane. So we've got a queue worker that can run our requests in the background using NATs. And so we get a queue built in. There you go. There's a reason. So if you adopt OpenFaaS, your legacy code running in a Docker image can automatically run asynchronously. It's built in. We have Prometheus, which gives you metrics. The gateway has authentication on its API by default, and there's also enterprise-grade OAuth available if you want. We can scale functions down, and then we can also scale them up using Alert Manager. So I did actually run FaaS-CLI login earlier, and I should be able to go FaaS-CLI list. We see I haven't had this cluster on for a while, but last time I did, I deployed these 3 functions. Node info is one of them, and if we curl the master's IP, there's a node port open, and I've just put the name of the function, and I can curl this guy, come back and tell me just some basic info for CPUs. This function happens to say if you put verbose, it will give you detailed information about the Ethernet adapters as well. We could just build a function and we could deploy it here, but this is an example of how you can get OpenFaaS even on a Raspberry Pi. Ketchup is pretty new tool, and the reason I built it originally was when I was writing tutorials on how to set up K3S and get people access to their kubeconfig file. It was quite complicated. Yeah, so Bret's just sharing the repo.
I guess to the GitHub URL. Yeah.
And so the first picture that you'll see if you scroll down is how you form a cluster. So the example that we're seeing is you might have an EC2 VM, and maybe you've got or DigitalOcean VM, and they've got nothing on them at all, and you've just got your laptop. Rather than shelling into the machine and running the curl and the bash and the kubeadmin in it and all the rest of it, you run one single command, K3S or ketchup install, and it will log in over SSH, initialize K3S, and bring back a valid kubeconfig for you, having set all the TLS information correctly for the IP that you use. Now, when you join your next node into that, it runs, you run ketchup join, which will first log into the master, download the token that we need to join the cluster, a bit like we used in Swarm, and then use that on the SSH into the node. And so now the 24 Raspberry Pis I've got behind me, I could actually initialize them all in effectively just a bash loop. for I in 0 to 24, run ketchup join, and that would be it. I don't even have to log in and get the token.
And this is specifically, so this is not necessarily, this is kind of related, but not required for OpenFaaS, right? Like this is all about deploying Kubernetes clusters.
So Ketchup originally started like for deploying K3s, and you like Darren said, K3s started out as maybe this would be good for edge customers and Raspberry Pi, but it's actually a conformant distribution of Kubernetes that you can run anyway. You might as well run it in production. It's got commercial support and it's GA. So the second use case for this is once you've got the cluster, well, then what? I saw a lot of people following my tutorials, setting up Raspberry Pi clusters, installing OpenFaaS, and having fun. And I thought, well, what if we could build something into Ketchup that was already quite popular and well known, where we could have these apps, and maybe I could show you on my computer actually. If I open Docker, and we've got this Ketchup install and join. These are only for forming clusters. That's it. But then there's this new app command, and this has started to become quite interesting actually. And Darren has spoken to me as well at KubeCon about could this become maybe like the default installer for apps on K3s. We've got things like Cert Manager that are pretty easy to install, but are about 10 commands. Right. Who wants to do that? We've got things like OpenFaaS, which is getting simpler, but again, it's like 3 or 4 commands and generate your password, Minio, the metric server. Effectively, all of these can be installed in one command. And there was a blog post actually that I'll show you that took about 5 or 6 pages of documentation on different websites, by the way, down to just a few commands. And so this, if you get Ketchup using the curl script, you can then install nginx ingress with one command, just literally that. So if I think I've got Docker running now. Let's see if I can create a tiny Kubernetes cluster. This is going to get the container has to get ready. Okay, we're now ready. And we could install nginx ingress. And if we don't have a public IP address, there's host mode is a flag. Now, actually, what that converts into is about 8 different really cryptic commands normally. But we can just do that in one shot now. Or we can just specify off 1, 2, 3, 4 Mississippi, and bang, we've got nginx just like that. And what happens is it goes off, downloads the Helm chart, updates it in the local repo, downloads Helm itself, so you don't have to worry about that. And then it does it because this was devised when Helm 2 was popular. It actually bypasses Tiller, which is considered insecure, and templates of files. What you'll see if we install the OpenFaaS app is that it has a bunch of really helpful add-ons that are like strongly typed flags. These aren't things you have to go and search a README file for and get confused about and get wrong. They're strongly typed. So we can say, right, I want OpenFaaS with, I don't know, like 3 gateway replicas. And I also want you to install this with Helm 3. And so it's just a single command. And then we're just going to get OpenFaaS like that. And it's still using a Helm chart. And maybe in your production pipeline, you might want to use something like Flux. That's fair game. And then at the end of each app, we give you this information on how you can maybe check that your OpenFaaS container started up correctly, how you can log in and then go and deploy something.
Wow. So how does that so you're using a Helm chart without needing Helm? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. So Helm 3, there's Helm 2 and 3.
Right.
Helm 2 used Tiller, which a lot of people consider sort of evil because it wasn't very well restricted with security permissions. So this would just download the Tiller binary, the Helm binary, sorry. If I actually delete my Ketchup folder, we'll see, we can see it download that. So let's install something else. We'll put the metric server in. Now, the first thing it does, it determines that I'm on a PC running Mac, and then it goes off and downloads the correct Helm binary for that. So we can see Darwin there. On the Raspberry Pi, if I run this, it will detect the OS and then download that. What it also does with OpenFaaS is it, based upon this, uses the correct values file for your Helm chart. So if you don't have, let's say, multi-arch images, but you've got images for different architectures, you can have a different Helm YAML file. And this will be able to figure it out and inject it. But once that was downloaded, it then extracted everything into this folder. And then we've got these templates that were created. And the final step of the code is just to do a kubectl apply. Right. Now, some people might be saying, well, now we've got Helm 3, this isn't required anymore. Well, actually, I think there's still a lot of value here in having these info messages, in having the automation, the strongly typed flags, and actually having apps that you know are maintained and that you can just, in this blog post, get Nginx, get Cert Manager, get OpenFaaS, and then we even made an app that sets up your TLS and ingress. So after these 4 commands, you will have a HTTPS website with OpenFaaS on it on the internet.
Wow. And the question we just had, how OpenFaaS is different from Knative?
Yeah, I mean, OpenFaaS started in 2016, and that was the first commit. It's a community-driven project with over 20,000 GitHub stars, over 250 contributors. There's really a community project, and that's very, very important to it, to have that independence. Knative is much newer. I guess, is it about a year old now, maybe a year and a half, that was built with Google and their partners. And to begin with, it was very tightly coupled to Istio and extremely heavyweight. I mean, we tested it and we couldn't get it to run in 16 gigs of RAM because they were really going after a different target market. There are folks that have tried Knative because their CTO has told them to, and they're happy with it. There's also people that have come to our community and said, well, we've looked at all of the options, and one thing that we really liked about OpenFaaS was the community and the simplicity that it has. And, I think if you're thinking of trying one or the other, my advice would be to try both and make your own mind up based upon your use case and how well you feel either project suits it.
Yeah. All right. That's a good answer. Because there's obviously lots of opinions on ways to do things, as we are learning in this show, that there is rarely just one choice anymore for how to use container stuff. It's the whole landscape has changed in the last 5 years, and we now have a plethora of choices. But like you pointed out, this has been around a long time. 2016 in container speak is forever. So let's shift gears a little bit and talk about another one of your projects, because Alex is constantly coming up with new ways to use containers and to support Kubernetes, especially now that is such a dominating part of the ecosystem. And you have a project called Inlets. Let me show that off. The Inlets GitHub page at github.com/inlets/inlets.
Are you sharing that?
I'm sorry. Yeah, I'm sorry. I was sharing, but I didn't hit the button.
So
I'm going to put that up.
I don't know if you've used ngrok or heard of it, or maybe you've used Cloudflare's Argo project. Inlets is very similar to that, except it really came about out of a necessity to get tunnels that would work in the enterprise. And I think because ngrok's done so well, so many people know it for exposing local web services to the internet, that administrators were right on that. They were like, we're going to blanket ban ngrok.io.
Yeah.
And so if you work at an enterprise company like VMware, where I was just over a year ago, and you have a team that needs to test webhooks for the project they're working on as part of their daily duties, you're kind of screwed. There's not a lot that you can do, and so especially if you don't have a budget to get them AWS EC2 instances and stuff like that. So I put together this project over the Christmas break. It was like my downtime project, and it just worked. And so we were able to provision our own VMs, $5 DigitalOcean Droplet as the exit server, That's where the internet can get to. And then by dialing out to it with a WebSocket and then keeping it open, what we could do on the other end of the code is say, well, if we need this website or we need this web page, just go and grab it and then send it back to the droplet. So in that way, we're able to test these webhooks and get public access to it. A cluster that might be running on K3s, might be running in a VM 3 levels deep, and basically anywhere that can reach out, you can now get into it.
Right. And this is all on infrastructure you have more control over. It's not someone else's shared or free resource that you don't know what's going on in that connection. So
Yeah, absolutely. But if that is important to people, they can use Heroku as an exit node. There are some other services that you might want to look at too. There's a free tier with GCP. A contributor called Utsav, he added that. And if you use, I think it's the F1 Micro in a certain region, it's effectively free for the month. AWS has some free tier as well, so it doesn't have to cost you a lot, and you can actually multiplex multiple websites through that. Example might be, let's say you've got your OpenFaaS website, you've got Prometheus and Grafana. Using one exit node IP and Droplet, we can just forward the whole 3 of them out.
Very cool. Did you want to talk more about that or demo it or anything?
You could demo of it, actually.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of one of those things where it either works or it doesn't. But I think conceptually, for those that haven't been able, or hadn't had a need or didn't know about ngrok and other tools like that, I think it would be cool to just kind of show how easy this can be to set up.
Let's see, have we got any React developers on the chat tonight?
Say hi in chat if you have ever developed a React app.
So let's create React app. We're going to pretend that I'm a freelancer. I'm maybe a Bret in a past life, and I've built this great app. It's ready for the client to see, but I'm cheap as well, and I don't want to deploy it on EC2. Maybe it's not quite ready, or I'm hacking on it a lot. I keep changing it, and isn't React fast? Oh my goodness. Really gonna have to pad this one out, Bret.
No, it's fine.
This is not Inlets, by the way. So
this is where in the demo when we make the podcast, we cut through the npm install portion of this.
So there's the Inlet CLI, and normally you go and set up your server, but who wants to set up servers, especially if you're used to serverless? So we create this CLI called Inlet CTL. And it allows me to go off and just create the exit node automatically. And it gives me almost like a connection string that I can use. So what I'm going to do is create, use provider, DigitalOcean, my favorite cloud at the moment, friends of the project as well. I'm going to say I want that in the London region, which is a default. And I have to specify an access token because I'm going to use the API. Let me see. So that's going to create the exit node on DigitalOcean. Let's run that. Now this will tick a few times because we know you can't create a server instantly, but maybe in about 20 seconds. And whilst that's running, Create React App is contending with Skype for resources back there, where we can race them off together. And once that's done, I will basically run Inlet's client on my computer, and then that will connect over the internet. But I need to tell it where it's pointing to. So where is this actually pointing? Well, let's see. Let's go into my app, npm start. I think what is it, port 3000? Yeah,
good
localhost 3000.
Yeah. Okay, so in the background, Inlets is actually provisioning the VM on DigitalOcean, right?
Yeah, the VM's done. I mean, it was done in about 20 seconds.
Yeah.
We need to get the nice spinning atom now. And then I'm going to change this command. So the upstream is going to be 3000 for that React. And then there's an auth token, and there's the remote IP address here as well. That's connected now. And don't you love a live demo? Let's see if it works. Oh yeah, there we go.
Sweet.
So anybody, like, if you can type that in fast enough, you'll get to this. Now, this live experience is the same as what I've got on localhost. So if you've developed in React, you know that we can now go into source, app.js, and learn React. Let's change this to learn OpenFaaS, Ketchup, and Inlets. And they're both good. So our customer is now looking at that live site. Freelancer version of me is sat here, very happy. I'm about to get my invoice paid, right? And I've got this experience. But if I also wanted to, remember that Kubernetes cluster that I had earlier? Well, I don't have to forward things on my own computer. I can actually forward that as well. So if I put in here 101, which is the master IP, 31112, which is the node port for OpenFaaS, I've still got the same server up and running, but now I can do function, and it was node info. And there we go. Now I'm forwarding that Raspberry Pi cluster behind me, and this function is load balanced across 20 of them, and I'm exposing that out directly through this tunnel that's running here. And when I'm done, if I want a kill switch, I can control C this. There is an ID here which was provisioned with the host, and just like the create, I can go delete ID, and that's now gone out of my account, and tunnel's down. It's all gone.
That is pretty easy. What kind of infrastructure I don't know if you mentioned it, does it support? So we know DigitalOcean. Do you have other?
Yeah. So this is the automated side of it. I mean, you can run Inlets wherever you want. There's absolutely no restrictions. And by the way, it doesn't have to be between a private network and the internet. One of the earliest sort of users of this was a company called Vision that automate OpenShift. And they wanted to get the Kubernetes API server from a really restrictive VPC for the customer to a slightly less restrictive VPC that they run their control plane in, and they're using Inlets for that.
Yeah, so that prevents them from having to set up all this custom infrastructure and working with network teams and all that just to get one team into one port on one server in AWS. Yeah, that's a great use case I didn't think about. Yeah.
Yeah, so the Inlet CTL will create DigitalOcean, GCE, EC2, Packet, Scaleway, Civo. But there's one other thing that I'm really sort of proud about, which is the Inlets operator. And I don't know if you've ever had like a Minikube cluster and found out what happens when you try to run a load balancer. You try and run something that's got a load balancer in it.
You're talking about the load balancer node type and resources? Are you talking about
so service. So load in Kubernetes, let's say you've got an AWS EKS and you're deploying.
Oh, okay.
What should we deploy? Let's say we deployed OpenFaaS and we want to get to the UI. We've got a type of load balancer. Well, what a cloud provider will do is it will go off and it will go, I know how to do that. I'm going to get this one in this rack. I'm going to assign it to you. I'm going to plumb it into your cluster. That's yours now. And then when the public hits that IP, they get into your cluster and they access your private resource that you've got there.
Yeah.
You can't really do that when you're working at home, on a laptop, or remotely. But the good news is that you can actually use the Inlets operator. Now, if we think back, I did that Inlet CTL create. It's a very similar command. What I'll do is ketchup app install Inlets operator. And then into this, I'm going to put basically token file for my access token for DigitalOcean in this instance again. And I don't really think I need anything else. Maybe provider. And this will install an operator. Provider. Let's just check what kube context we're on first. We don't want to mess this up. Have we got the config command? There's because I'm using a local cluster here. That's what I want.
There you go.
Okay, 3D.
That looks...
So always check your kube context, kids. You do not want to delete production. All right. Test your backup strategies. Here's the thing. And as we know before, we've already got Helm, so it's not going to download it again. It's using the proper chart. It's inputting the values. And now, if we get services, we can see that we deployed Nginx earlier, right?
Yeah.
That should actually now get a public IP because the Inlets operator is scanning for these resources, looking for them, trying to allocate them there when they've got that specific type.
Oh, interesting. Okay, so when it sees the load balancer type, it automatically routes that through the inlet server.
Yeah. So let's have a look and see if we've got anything.
Yeah, because there's with my Kubernetes students, that's one of the challenges too. Is that when you start getting into things like services, and it gets worse, and you get into ingress and persistent storage and all that, where everyone's on a different type of machine, and everyone's got a different setup, and so not everyone the load balancer service type won't always work for different setups. Like you mentioned, Minikube and Micro K8s, they don't work out of the box, and so it's challenging for learning parts because I have to end up making 3 ways of doing the same thing for each command, and this is actually a pretty interesting way to say, hey, just use inlets to get this. What about like on your local machine? Because
this is on my local machine. I'm on my Mac Mini now, and if you switch back to the screen, we've got the IP back. It's showing up on kubectl, and I'm going to curl it. Is that gonna work? Let's see. So we did actually get it. This is the logs of the operator. It saw that. Oh, okay. Because I'm running. K3s comes with traffic, and traffic is conflicting for IPs.
Oh.
But there we go. So the one for traffic has worked, and that's actually in. Don't install 2 ingress controllers like I've done. It's a very bad idea. but there it is, and so I can curl that. And obviously, ingress controller is meant to go to a resource, so it's not gonna work. But we're getting a response back.
In this case, a 404 is good, and it's what we expect. Yeah,
it's what we're expecting. And so, if I was to deploy OpenFaaS again, let's see, what have we got? Get deploys in OpenFaaS namespace. Have we got a service for it? This is as a node port. Okay, so Ketchup, rather than going to all of like the complicated pages to figure out what option I need from the Helm chart README, I just put load balancer. Let's see if I can install over the top. And the idea is here now that flag has set a specific value for me, and the service has now been changed to a load balancer. And we know what happens when we create a load balancer. The inlets operator gets on it.
Was that a test? Well, so the one thought I had was, could inlets? Okay, so like I'm on a Mac like you, and when I'm using Docker Desktop with Kubernetes, it has the VPN kit feature set inside so that the load balancer service type works. But that's not true if I'm using Micro K8s or Minikube or anything else locally.
What do you mean works? I mean, it doesn't give you a public IP.
No. It's for local development. Yeah.
Yeah.
So in other words, it's routing. It will acknowledge the node type and handle, or the service type rather, of load balancer, and it'll handle it. If you try to do it on Minikube or Micro K8s, it just doesn't work. It won't. The load balancer service type will say, it won't know what to do. And I was sitting here wondering, the way that you're doing it is with an external. The use cases for getting it accessible externally, but what if I simply want, one of the problems is if someone's running Minikube on a Mac, they can't use the local host, so. Yeah,
you're right.
And I was wondering if inlets could run directly on the Mac, the inlet service, and then you could.
It can. So it can do all of it can actually do a kubectl port forward as well. That's another part of inlet CTL. Is this kube forward command. And with this, I can say forward me all the traffic from test app express.js, and then I can say where my server's listening. But I don't know if you've used this one, but this should work for you. If you can get kubectl from where you are, is kubectl port forward, and this is pretty nice. So I can go gateway OpenFaaS 80808080, and this will now port forward that OpenFaaS. I mean, this isn't anything to do with the open source projects that I'm working on. This is a Kubernetes thing, but there we go. This is something you should probably have a look into if you're not using it.
Yeah, so that's the option that I give people, but one of the challenges is like in a complicated enough demo, there's multiple ports, so then I end up the setup just is not optimized because I end up with saying, now you got to run this in 4 different windows for the 4 different ports. And then, like the voting example from Docker, right? You've got the 2 different websites. And now I have to run 2 because it's not demonized. It's running in the shell. So I was sitting there thinking, ooh, the operator was running. It would just pick up anything that says load balancer and could automatically potentially forward from the local host so that they could just use the local host. Because one of the challenges that Jerome Petazzoni and I have had is in teaching Kubernetes, whether it's in workshops or online, is that once you start getting anything that has to do with storage or networking, everyone's setup is different. And so he's, in his way, he's putting them on just regular VMs in the cloud, so everybody has a standard setup. But when people are learning on their own, their setups are so vast. People are using the web-based versions, Code Kata and Kubernetes, play with Kubernetes, that kind of stuff. And I was thinking, at least if I knew they were on a Mac and they were having something locally, that is that what you could call it, the Inlets daemon? Is that what's running on your Linux nodes?
So the Inlets server is what faces like where you want your users to access.
Yeah.
And it can work for your use case totally.
Yeah.
The normal kind of use case is that you're trying to get some network access to somewhere where you just can't. Maybe behind NAT, maybe behind a firewall, maybe you're at work. But yeah, I'm pretty sure we could put something together. Or there might be a tool that someone's already created, like Kube Forward, that might work for this too. Yeah.
Kube Forward. I don't know about that one. Yeah. All right. We have one more thing on your list because you are the open source fanatic. Like you make more open source in a month than I make in 3 years. So, yeah. I noticed one other thing on your list that I have no awareness of, which is faasd, serverless with CNI and container D.
Well, a friend, and well, I'm no longer a Docker captain, but a fellow Docker captain, Phil Estes. Right, he's very much an advocate for the Container D project.
Yeah.
Container D is part of FaaSD. So what FaaSD is if you took Kubernetes and you took Docker and you got rid of them, what is left that can run a container? What's at the very bottom level? It's something called Container D. Most of the time, I mean, Red Hat that have their own technologies as well,
right?
That they prefer. But Containerd is a CNCF project, and it was spun out, I think, by Michael Crosby originally as a weekend project, and it's the very bottom part, and under that is something like runc or Kata containers. So I thought, and this was about a year ago, I started on this journey. Can I just make a provider for OpenFaaS? Because remember, OpenFaaS got launched on Swarm. It then 1 month later switched over to supporting Kubernetes fully. Then we had people add Rancher 1.0. Then we had people add Nomad from HashiCorp, all effectively working with all the same tools and everything. So then I thought, well, can I make a Containerd backend that might be great for local development, for edge devices, or just for people that really just need some functions and endpoints in an appliance, in a VM, and they don't want to get into all of this complicated Kubernetes stuff.
Right.
And that's FaaSD.
Very cool.
Yeah.
Is this your latest project?
This is the latest one, and I started it a year ago, but I got really stuck because it turns out that low-level container tools are very poorly documented. and it's really hard to get help.
Yeah.
And this is something that I've been sort of bringing up to the Containerd team and to the CNI team. CNI gets IP addresses for containers, and Containerd runs the container for you, and then run sees it's like sort of best mate as well. So with the three of those projects, we can get something that looks like a single node Kubernetes cluster, but with way less RAM, way less complication. And because OpenFaaS already schedules containers for you, it would normally lean on Kubernetes to do that, but instead we're just able to do it all in one shot. There's a little blog post that you might be able to find. Yeah, am I sharing, or is that you?
Yeah, that's you.
Is that me? So this was quite fun. I wrote this up when I got everything working end to end, and you'll see you'll walk through adding Containerd, and then you'll install the networking. After that, there's FaaS Containerd that's kind of a plugin for this, but you do then get to do stuff that's a bit different. Like normally you're probably not messing about with systemd. Well, we're using systemd to run a lot of the stuff here, and it's perfectly good for that. And then rather than Docker logs, you can go off and get the logs back from there. It shows you how you can deploy a function from the store, how to log in. This is a function that gives you an avatar for GitHub, and we sort of invoke it and get the image back, run asynchronously. This is a really powerful system. And what I loved was, because these are containers and OpenFaaS has always been built for containers, it was very easy just to lift and shift that. And even we talked about inlets, you can then go and get a public IP for that faasd server that you're running, and now anyone in the world that you choose can access it.
And this is I'm trying to think of when I would choose this over something else. This is designed for a single server, right?
Right now, there's no clustering built in, but I think the way we tend to think about clustering is through the lens of what we already have. So we think of, we need to have this quorum, we need to have a join and a master and a server and a worker. But what if we kind of looked at, I don't know, hard drives, the idea of RAID? We have redundancy. What if we had exactly the same stuff deployed on, I don't know, 3 different EC2 nodes, all exactly the same, and DNS round robin? Now we don't need Kubernetes, and we can do something extremely simple. And we can still get our containers and repeatable builds. We still get the networking and a production grade container orchestrator. But a lot of those headaches and complications have gone away.
Yeah. In the past, when someone wanted the simplest setup, I often, just for running containers, I would often tell them just a single node swarm because it allowed them to scale. But with K3s and now Ketchup, the argument for Kubernetes is so more complex to just install, is continuing to, like, that the separation between the two in terms of installation complexity continues to narrow. So something like this is even simpler. So I'm wondering how, I have to put this into my repertoire of when to recommend something for a single node setup like this.
I think we're sort of trying to figure out where it fits as well. I mean, this started as an innovation project, and it's gone really well. And just like FaaS when it began, the first day I went up in front of 6,000 people, I didn't have 100 emails the next day of people putting it into production. It took time, and sometimes, I think you could probably split down the middle. You have maybe explorers and you have exploiters, and the exploiters know the market and they're tapping into what's already there and making use of it. Maybe, strip mining open source projects. And you have the explorers that are coming along and trying to figure out, would this be smart? Is there any benefit to it? Would it be a good idea? What if I created this and saw what happened? And I kind of think that when I look at Darren Shepherd from Rancher that created K3s, that's kind of what he does with his projects. Is he'll put some stuff together to try and get people talking. I know thought leader is something that's a bit of a dirty word at the moment, but perhaps a thought leader will come along and try to get people thinking and coming in a direction. I think we will see more people building tools on top of Containerd, and if all this ends up being is an interesting example of a reference architecture of how you can do that, then I think that would be a good outcome. But I'm looking for input from the community, and I think that we can do things like have a very fast cold start for a function. We can scale things down and up pretty much instantaneously, and I do think that the way we look at clustering it could be a bit narrow, and there might be room for us to have like a simpler way where it's much more like just redundancy rather than replicas that are scheduled and one thing and another.
Right. Right. Which is similar to the way we used to do databases, right? It was a single node with a mirror, but you weren't really pointing to those backup plans. You were always just using the main one, and you had a little bit more. It was easier to set up because you didn't have to worry about all the the load balancers in front, the auto failover, and the IP transitioning. And it was actually a conversation we had just the other night at the Docker and Kubernetes meetup here locally, was around just the complexity of failing over from one node to another, or just the fact that if you want to set up a cluster, it's implied that you have something in front of it, which not everyone has, and it can be really tricky. So
it can be tricky. Some of the things that I think one of the things that happens when you create open source software is that you can make it very easy for developers to build software on top of that and to get a speed up and an advantage. But it's not necessarily a good commercial strategy to make things too easy. And so perhaps I haven't had the best commercial strategy with OpenFaaS as of late. Almost none of the companies that use it in production pay anything towards it, or its upkeep. They're very happy to consume support time and one thing and another. Now, there are a few exceptions, but I think I've been on a sort of a journey of discovery and kind of figuring out what you can do to keep an open source project going long term. It is very draining and can be very stressful when somebody like me sat there, or the maintainer of Caddy, Mr. Holt or Asim from the Micro project, and you sort of sat there and you're like, okay, so nobody's paying for this, nobody will pay for it because they're running it in production, transferring millions of dollars, but they've got no reason to pay or to sponsor or help. Okay, woe is me, right? And you can get there. And then somebody will mention crowdsourcing platform like Patreon or GitHub sponsors, but I just really haven't had success with that. I really haven't been able to build up enough momentum with it. And so this year, after I left VMware, I kind of tried that path for a few months. And in June, I just took on some commercial work using like the skills that I had. So you're a Docker captain. I used to be one, a CNCF ambassador.
You're alumni.
But we're both quite good at sort of digesting technology and making it accessible, democratizing software for developers, helping people make decisions, help people connect with developers. And so I thought maybe that's what I should be doing. And so I started working for a small company that wanted to launch a managed Kubernetes service. They actually wanted to launch managed OpenFaaS, and I told them not to do that because I thought it would be better for them with the wave to capitalize on Kubernetes. That went really well. I've done some commercial work with Rancher Labs, with Packet, built out a really nice OpenFaaS IoT project for them to show off their bare metal for one of their clients at CES. Helped a company called Humio that does a log aggregation with developer experience and help them plan out a marketplace. And I think that, there are people that will say companies should pay you for using the project and for the value they're capturing.
Yeah,
I do agree with that, in the same way that I'd agree that in theory communism sounds like a great idea. It's like, but is it practical? Is it going to work its way out? And I think for me, I've come on this journey of trying to work off Patreon, trying to work in a big commercial political environment and still get this project done, to now being entirely dependent on me and working to receive money to then work on the project. And
Yeah.
that's sort of where I am. And I'd like to get to the point where, and I say this a little bit in the third birthday blog post, where there's reasons for companies to pay that they feel happy with. And we've seen companies like HashiCorp do well with this sort of model. There's some features a community are clearly not going to want, but enterprise companies do. You build that and then they can purchase it from you.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's funny how we've been all using open source for so long, but I still feel like we're figuring this sponsorship and the support of a lot of this, we're figuring it out. Um, when I think about open source, and I think about how much of it I use, when going all the way down, right? Like the people that are developing the network driver, or whatever, or the curl tool, all the things
Yeah.
that we just take for granted. And I've started to make it a habit every year, to try to find a couple that I didn't normally care about before, and try to support them, because if I'm in this arena and I'm working on open source, a lot of the content I create is open source, then I need to reciprocate as well, because I think generosity is part of it, but also it's like we've got to change the culture of how people perceive open source and the transaction we all have, right? Like if I'm completely taking but not giving, and GitHub obviously completely raised the awareness of open source, and I love that they're dipping their toe in the sponsoring thing. So while we're on this topic with you, I just want to mention that for those of you watching, if you're at all interested in helping Alex with his open source, because he's got a ton of stuff here, you can now sponsor him on GitHub, which I just did.
Thank you.
I should have done it a year ago, but the projects he's working on aren't just silly little things that he uses. These are things that indeed thousands and thousands of people are using. He's got 20,000 likes, I think, on OpenFaaS, right? On stars.
Yeah,
on
I mean,
GitHub.
if you aggregate it across the main repos, there's over 20,000 stars on that.
Yeah.
There's 5,000 stars on Inlets. There's almost 1.5 thousand on Ketchup. And we look at the downloads, and it's not that I expect a developer that installs something on his Raspberry Pi at the weekend to cough up $100 a month. I mean, one thing that I'll show you, maybe show you on my screen, is that I put together insiders updates, emails, if you like, and they take me a good hour or so to write. This was the insiders update for December, and they generally have a theme. There was a video of the birthday celebration, some of the content and blog posts, new features from the project, security updates that you're going to need. Here was a diagram about FaaSD and sort of helping people understand where it fits in and where they might use it. So these are very detailed. There's a lot of value here. But, I had somebody say to me, why, I'm not going to sponsor you because I don't use any of your projects. And I think that's really a moot point, because companies that do use a project don't sponsor either. So please don't do it because you use it. Do it because you believe in what I'm doing and you want to see it continue. I'm working for a living, and it's very hard and stressful being self-employed and not knowing where the next paycheck's going to come from. But I'm happy to do that because I believe that OpenFaaS deserves a future. And there isn't anyone else that's kind of going to give up their job and work on it full time. It would be nice if the companies appreciated it, but I'm good with where we are. What we do have is some really nice sponsors that have put up a little bit of money to be on the homepage. So I want to say thank you to the guys that are shown there as well.
Yeah. It's a pretty good list too.
You can get swag as well. There's the cups, as we see here, and then in the latest email, there's some more content. But I mean, one of the other things is that if you Google bare metal Kubernetes, Golang unit testing, have like hundreds of blog posts, and the chances are that you've read one. If you want to keep seeing them, if you found them useful, then all of this support helps me to understand that it's appreciated, and maybe we can kind of meet in the middle. it would be great if the GitHub sponsors funded 1 day of my time per week, or maybe per month.
Yeah.
Maybe over time might go to 2. And then it means that I have to hustle less to get less client work, because I can then work on the open source or the tutorial that you're going to use at work to land a next promotion or whatever it happens to be.
Yeah. One thing that, like this show, that a lot of my students really enjoy is the Q&A parts. So, I'm sure that you're going to be experimenting with lots of stuff. It sounds like you're shifting, by the way, from Patreon over to GitHub sponsorship. Is that right?
Yeah, so I don't know where we'll be with GitHub sponsors when we're fully out of the sort of initial period, whether there's going to be a fee. I imagine there will be, but the fee on Patreon is definitely higher at the moment. And the GitHub is much easier to use, despite being quite a nascent platform, quite small. It only just got the ability to show who had sponsored and cancelled. And I looked at it and I was like, my gosh, that's why this feels like such a struggle, because like 10 people cancelled in the last week. And then on Patreon, $300 of people cancelled like in the week before Christmas. And so when you add it all up, it's quite difficult.
Quite a
it's
churn.
2 steps forward, maybe 3 steps back. But yeah, I mean, GitHub's what I'm focusing on. All of my updates can get sent there through the email system that they have, which I think people really like. And then it's just great to have it all integrated. I put all of my code on GitHub. I like just using that one platform for everything.
Yeah, I do. One of the things I do like about Patreon is that it allows you to like put up some descriptions and videos and stuff. And I'm not sure, you're actually the first person, excuse me, on GitHub that I've sponsored, and I wasn't really sure of the experience, but there is that nice intro text that you get to have there for sponsoring someone. Because I just figured, like, this to me is like the 1.0 release of them supporting sponsors. This is their entry into it. Oh, and I guess the other positive thing about GitHub is that they match, right? At least for now, they're matching sponsorships.
Well, I mean, I burnt through that, so there's no matches for me now. But
it told me, it said it was matching. That's weird. It said
up to there's like imagine it's like a bursary, and you drain it down. So if you get $100 that month, they'll give you 200. But then that's $100 out of your GitHub bank account, if you like. And when that's all drawn down, there's no matching after that.
Okay, you got Brandon on here, by the way, saying fellow sponsors.
Thank you,
Brendan Gula.
You really appreciate it. And I know that some people will be inspired to sponsor, and then they'll they just can't manage it anymore. Whether it's £3 a month, or $5 a month, which is probably less than the cost of a coffee in the US. Sometimes you just can't do it anymore, and I understand. But I don't think it's a lot of money. And if we get enough people involved, you get the insiders emails from me. You get to see what I'm doing. You get the latest access to what I'm building. Maybe FaaSD would be great at your company, but you're never going to know. Or if you're going to have to sift through my Twitter feed, which I put far too much content out on.
Yeah, I do like the idea of having insider updates like that, where one of the challenges we've had, probably the same for you, is that things are spread out everywhere. You've got videos on YouTube and tweets about things that get lost in the feed, and you've got different repos, and a lot of stuff isn't blog worthy, right? Like when you don't necessarily want to have a blog entry on a blog, and not very many of us go and stare at a blog and read through a bunch of posts all at once. So I've always liked this idea of the newsletter in the inbox, and is that what the updates and GitHub does?
What I showed you, I think that came onto your screen, didn't it? When I showed the birthday cake, and
yep,
you saw that. So that was an example of one. This is actually my sponsor's preview page. You can see why I'm doing this, why I've decided to go down this track. And there is a little video, like you said, so I've posted that on there. And it kind of talks about my expectations. Each level has different perks, and then we're at 109. But if you took 109 and you times it by 5, it's still not. I mean, what can you do with $500 a month?
Right.
But I
Can't quit your
think
job.
it's complementary and it's additive and it's definitely helpful. And for me, I think it's more of a support aspect. There's a lot of people here that I know, or that I want to get to know, and I really appreciate seeing all these familiar faces here. I mean, it does mean a lot.
I do like the little display of all the people. That's pretty cool. Makes it feel like there's a community there that's helping you out. Yeah.
Yeah,
It,
yeah.
it entices me to join. So yeah. Well, and this is the beginning, right? This is not even a year-old feature in GitHub. So my hope
I
is that a lot more people get used to this method, and that people are willing to
Yeah.
spend a little bit of money every month, and they get used to the subscriptions. So
Right. I mean, and then that obviously it's more helpful to have a company, and quite often, the homepage sponsors, as I said before, they're not necessarily using OpenFaaS. DigitalOcean is a company that I think recognizes how much I talk about DigitalOcean and enjoy using it. Um, you know, I'm not paid to say that, but I just actually like it, and I know a lot of developers do too. They're a homepage sponsor, and so it's quite nice for them to do that and show how much they kind of care about open source. Rancher is up there too, and those are much more helpful. You imagine, one homepage sponsor for 6 months is the equivalent of quite a lot of little faces down here,
yeah,
and it all goes towards the same effort. But as I say, my blog post on the third birthday, my hope is to find a more sustainable or like recurring or passive income that could then get other people full time to come on board and work on these open source projects for the community and for the end users.
yeah,
What I do find is, I've had this a number of times. A commercial company is using a project, they won't sponsor, they won't take out a support contract, they won't take out professional services, and yet they'll ask lots and lots of questions, raise lots of PRs, and there'll be incredible drain on my time. And I'm trying to do my job. I'm trying to run a business, one
yeah,
thing another. There's other things that I'm interested in. The community may have no interest at all in the feature that they want because they're just volunteers, and yet they have these expectations, very lofty expectations that they're somehow owed something because the project's open source. And I
yeah,
really want to say that it's not. And if you want to have ultimate success with the project, imagine if you were working with Pivotal, you would have a technical account manager, you'd have maybe like a systems analyst or a sales engineer work with you to help you implement. And with DX, current client, that's what they've decided to do. So we have like 20% of time per week because it's a bit more of an implementation phase, and they've hit a few roadblocks that if they're on their own, that would have been it. But instead, Christian, one of the co-founders, will have a call. We'll look into the problem. Sometimes we'll figure out a solution straight away. Sometimes it will result in a patch or me prioritizing that for them. But he can't go to a random person in the community and just go, please look at this business thing for me. And so I think, companies that want to be really successful with open source projects, even if they don't want to sustain in the long run, could potentially benefit from like a customer success or a POC type of engagement.
yeah. And it's funny because when there's tools, a lot of the big tools we use, a lot of companies feel like they're let's just say Windows, for example, right? For years there was years and years and years and years. There was no way, unless you paid them hundreds of thousands of dollars, to really get to anyone of any meaningful authority to even talk about your feedback on changing a tool that your company completely depends upon in every way, right? And I think it's now we're even. I was reading a great article the other day that was talking about how Netflix was one of the first everyday common consumer subscriptions that people had on a monthly basis. Like it was like even when it was a DVD service in America, it was one of the first times we were all signing up for a thing that we were getting monthly and ongoing benefits. And that here we are, almost 20 years later, where we've all got dozens, some of us dozens of subscriptions to small little things, whether it's, Apple TV Plus or Hulu or, whatever, something on the internet that you're paying for that you really like. And I really hope that it seems like the right time for us to introduce these subscriptions for the idea of helping software, even when it's not necessarily a formal contract, but that it's cool that you have that formal contract. It's not a whole lot of open source people can do that. So it's cool
Right.
that I think it's cool that you can offer that
I
to people.
couldn't do it when I was at VMware.
Yeah.
There's no way. And I remember speaking to my manager at the time, and he said, "It sounds like you're trying to start a business." And now that I have the ability to, it's not those existing customers that needed that help, because I think there is this mentality that open source should be free and done free. It's the newer clients that are coming in now, like, we want to do this, want to solve this problem, and they see the value in using someone external. I think the market for this sort of thing is smaller than the market for helping brands and companies connect with developers. And so I would see probably a mix of that in over the next year for me. But, the better I do in the business, the better OpenFaaS is going to do. And the more sponsorship, then the easier that will be too.
Yeah. Well, I definitely wish you the best of luck. I think you make great stuff ever since that day at DockerCon 2017 when you got on stage and demoed the first time I'd ever seen a AI speaker sitting on the stage actually responding to you over the
tannoy. It's like the voice of God, wasn't it? It was amazing.
The speakers of those gigantic 100,000 watt speakers, and it was really cool. So I don't know if you ever get to do that again, but I recommend it to anyone who could see that in a show. It was really cool. And we definitely should have you back on the show to just talk about how, 6 months from now, talking about, a world of open source and trying to use open source as a vessel for income. And there's lots of people trying to do it. And I applaud you for being brave enough to give it a shot, because it can be pretty scary when you have a family to support. And I understand that, as being a multi-time business owner and business owner failure, I can say that it's not easy, and it keeps you up at night sometimes. So
yeah, I appreciate that, Bret. And it's not just that I kind of want to do open source full time, although it's enjoyable. This project does need capital deployed to it to survive and to thrive. And at the moment, I'm doing what I can, but also the community make a huge impact, and there's some really great people around me. Again, that's another part of this. Is I had 2 or 3 one-to-ones today. One with a guy in India who works a job, and he's very loyal. He's been around from the beginning, and he gets a lot from it. Particularly, he doesn't get to express his creativity and his interest in technology as much as he wants to at work, and that reminds me of how it used to be for me in my sort of past, younger me. And so I like to see these people connect. And today we had this conversation. He was telling me how much I'd encouraged him and helped him to grow all these. He said, I just knew a few Docker commands when I met you, and now I'm writing Go in OpenFaaS and running my own Kubernetes. I said, well, what do you think about you doing that for someone else? What, would you like to do that? And so now sort of seeding that idea for him and helping him to become a leader in and of himself, when really, it's probably something he'd never have considered until we kind of got together and kind of being able to emulate that for him.
Yeah, that's great. And it's also hard for you both of you to be on the call at the same time, because you in India are like 10 hours apart or something.
India's okay. It's India and Pacific that is impossible, I would think.
Yeah. I have a lot of students from India. So shout out to all you all if you're watching. It's always a challenge because they're asking all the great questions at 3 a.m. for me. So I can't always be there to help them when they need it. Well, again, thank you so much for being on the show. For those of you all that are joining here at the very end, because I know YouTube, it's, we all just watch 10 minutes of something and move on. But if you're joining, we just had a great show about a lot of Alex's projects, all related to Docker and Kubernetes and container stuff and functions as a service. So make sure you watch that when it processes here in an hour or two, and you can watch it the whole show over again. But the summary here is that for those of us that work in open source, we appreciate your patronage. And Alex is, I'll show it one more time, on his GitHub page. You can sponsor him and all the great work he does. And he's looking for help there, as well as anyone who wants to help out in the open source community, especially like we mentioned DigitalOcean. I love DigitalOcean. I talk a lot about it in my courses, always recommending it for easy server spin-ups. And one of the things they do every October is, what's it called?
Oktoberfest.
Oktoberfest.
Yeah.
And you could help Alex with some of his open source, not only learning containers and Go and all these other leading technologies, but you could also do that in the fall. It's a little bit of ways, but I'm just giving you an idea for your fall projects. So Alex, we know that you can get Alex, by the way, on his Twitter handle down here below on the screen. You can follow him on GitHub, like we just talked about. Anywhere else you would want people to find you?
Yeah. So if you go to excuse me, slack.openfaas.io, not .com, that will give you the page for joining our Slack community. There's channels on there for just general Docker, for Kubernetes, for ARM, for Inlets, for Ketchup, and for contributing. And you're most welcome to come. If you're thinking about trying out some new tech with Kubernetes, or you want to chat, learn Golang, or contribute in some way, just be part of this journey, please do sign up. I'm just sharing a picture on my screen at the moment, and I wanted to say this is part of the Insiders Update of December. Thanks so much to my wife for all the support that you've given. I couldn't do this without you. You're a rock for me, and thank you for supporting me in this venture. I really appreciate everything that you do.
That's pretty great. And so you're wearing fantastic Christmas sweaters
really on my end, and say that if you're thinking of deploying a service to Kubernetes, or thinking of learning Kubernetes, the way to think about OpenFaaS is like a shell or an abstraction. Remember back to the days of mean and lamp stack. Well, OpenFaaS can be that for you, and I think it's probably worth giving a shot because a lot of companies have saved time. Inlets is a service tunnel that you can use between networks. It's great just to get a public IP for something, and it also integrates to Kubernetes. And then Ketchup powered this big cluster behind me. I set up 24 Raspberry Pi nodes, all running Kubernetes very quickly. You can use it in public cloud too, and you can install apps. So it makes the apps very, very easy. Mongo, Postgres, the dashboard for Kubernetes, whatever you want. Do check them out. It'd be great to hear from you. And if you need help with your developer brand or kind of getting a bit more visibility for your project in cloud native, feel free to get in touch.
That's a great description, and will probably be something I put at the beginning of the podcast because that's a great summary of all the projects all in one go. So yeah, thanks, man. And we will see everyone here back next Thursday with another YouTube Live. So make sure you click the subscribe and the like, and click that little dinner bell, and you'll get notifications when we go live. And I'm Bret Fisher, and see you next time on the internet. Thanks.
Thanks.